At the end of this video, you will have the following dashboard to monitor your Airflow tasks and DAGs. As you can see, we have a couple of metrics such as the task instance success rate, the DAG run success rate, the average DAG run duration, and so on. But the good news is you can create your own metric if you want to. How? Well, because we will create the following mini data engineering pipeline, which uses Airbyte to extract the data from the Airflow REST API, and then we will load the data into Snowflake that we will query using Superset. So as you can see, pretty simple project, but very useful. Hi, my name is Mark Lemerty, Head of Customer Education at Astronomer, best-selling instructor on Udemy. And if you want to stay up to date with Airflow, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. That will help me a lot, and smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. As usual, it's always better to learn by doing, and for that, I've created the following Notion page that you can find in the description down below. That being said, let's take a look at the schema of the project. And as you can see, the first step is to have access to an Airflow REST API. But to have access to this API, we need to have a running Airflow instance. For that, we will create a free trial account on Astronomer to get an Airflow instance up and running in the cloud. But obviously, if you already have an Airflow instance running somewhere, use yours, and you can try with a local Airflow instance, but I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. So please let me know in the comments below. That being said, you click on Get Started Free, then you enter your business email address, and you will have to create an organization and a workspace as described in the documentation. But again, if you have an Airflow instance with an access to the REST API, that is all what you need. Okay, let me create a workspace. Let's say team, and then I'm going to create a new deployment in that workspace. So let's say dev, and I want to use AWS, and we can stick to the default settings. Create deployment, and then let's wait for Airflow to be up and running. Okay, if you open the Airflow UI, you can see that we don't have any DAGs yet. So if you already have some DAGs, this is great. But if you don't, you can use this repository, which is a public repository. I have a few DAGs, actually 2 DAGs that you can use. And by the way, this is an Astro project. So if you have the Astro CLI, you can use it right away. So let's go back to Astro. I just need to upload those DAGs. And for that, I can sync my repository with my Airflow instance on Astro. So let's pick the repo, Airbyte Airflow Monitoring. Then I connect the repo, and I want to sync the branch main with the deployment dev, and then update mappings. And I can go back to the deployment, and here trigger a git deploy. Okay, so let's wait a little bit. Okay, I got a new deploy, and if we access the Airflow UI again, you can see that we have 2 DAGs as expected. So now I have some DAGs that I can run. The next step is to take a look at the Airflow REST API. In case you didn't know, Airflow has a pretty rich, stable REST API that you can find here in the documentation, with many different endpoints that you have access to. For example, you want to get some information about your DAG run, then you pick DAG run, and then you have all the things that you can do with that entity. For example, if you want to list DAG runs, you send this request get, and then you will see this response. Same thing if you want to access your task instances. Again, you have task instance, and you have all of those methods that you can use. And if you want to get the list of task instances, you have this endpoint, and you will see something like that in return. So I strongly recommend you to take a look at the Airflow REST API. You have many endpoints from which you can extract data and then use that data to monitor your Airflow instance. And that's exactly what we are going to do in this video. To access the API on your Airflow instance, that depends on how your instance is configured. So if you take a look at trying the API, you can see that one way to try if you have access to the API is by running this command with -- user and then username password. This is the basic authentication, which is the authentication by default. But obviously, if you are trying to reach the API on your Airflow instance in production, there is a good chance that it will be something else, okay? Something more secure, like an API token or something. But just keep in mind, by default, you can use your account, the one that you use to access your Airflow UI, and the REST API is at the following link, which is the Airflow URL /API/v1. Okay, now the question is, how can I use the Airflow API to extract some data to build the following dashboard to monitor my DAG runs and task instances? Well, if you remember the diagram at the beginning of the video, we will use Airbyte. So we will use Airbyte to extract the data using the different endpoints that the Airflow REST API offers, and we will load the data into Snowflake. If you don't know Airbyte, you can think of it as an open source data movement infrastructure for building EL data pipelines. I use Airbyte quite a lot to extract data from different sources, so I don't have to recreate the same scripts again and again. And honestly, I love the UI. I just find it very easy and straightforward to use. So that being said, you can go to airbyte.com and then try Airbyte Cloud for free. Easiest way to use it. And then you will access to this UI. So this is Airbyte, and the way it works is pretty simple. You need to configure a source and a destination. So in our case, the source is the Airflow REST API and the destination is Snowflake. Problem is, there is no source for the Airflow REST API. If you click on sources and then add a new source and look for Airflow, you have nothing. So we need to create this source to access the Airflow REST API using Airbyte. And guess what? You have the builder for that. So let's go to the builder and let's create a new custom connector. And here you have 3 different choices, but in our case, we need to start from scratch. So let's go for it. And then we can use the AI assist. I mean, honestly, I love this feature. And as you're gonna see, it's pretty amazing. So the way it works is simple. We just give a name to this connector. So in our case, Airflow REST API. And then it expects the public API documentation URL or the public open API specification URL. Basically, it will parse the documentation of your API, and based on that, you will be able to build the connector to extract the data at ease. It is much faster than before where you had to do everything manually, and especially when you have many endpoints. So let's configure this. We need to pass the public API documentation URL, which is this one, and please do it as well. And then we can pass the public Open API specification URL, and you will find that here. So Open API specification, open a new tab, copy the link, this one here. Then last but not least, you have the first data stream, the name of the first object you want to extract from your API. And let's say we want to extract DAG. So let's put DAG here. Then click create, and now the AI is figuring out how to build the connector using the API documentation. So let's wait a little bit, and here we are. The AI has done a few things for us. First, we have the API-based URL to access the Airflow REST API, and as you can see, this value is using a pair of curly brackets, which means it is a user input that you will need to provide when you will set up the connection. And then we have authentication, which is by default basic HTTP using the username and password as defined in the documentation right here. Next, we have some user inputs that again, we will have to provide when we will create the connector, domain, password, and username, and one stream corresponding to the DAGs endpoint so we can list the DAGs of our Airflow instance by using the get method, and there are some additional things that have been configured for us. Okay, now there are some changes to make. The first one is rename the stream DAG with DAGs so it is consistent with the URL path. And then if you go back to the global configuration, as I'm using Airflow on Astro, I won't use the authentication basic HTTP. Instead, I will use a bearer, but feel free to stick to the basic HTTP authentication if it is your case. Then for the API-based URL, we need to add the /API/v1/ as described right here. Okay, so now we have that. As you can see, we have 2 user inputs, domain and API key. Again, if you are using the basic HTTP method, you will still have username and password. But now we are ready to test the connector. So click on the stream DAGs and then test. And you can see that you have to pass some testing values. So the domain in my case is this link. Obviously, you have to put your domain, the URL to your Airflow instance. And for the API key, I do have one as I'm using Airflow on Astro. So now I can click on save and click on test. And as you can see, we fetched 2 records corresponding to the 2 DAGs that we have in the Airflow instance. So that's the beauty of the AI builder. In just a few steps, I've been able to create that connector, and now I'm able to pull data from the Airflow REST API. So that's why I truly love, honestly, this tool. Okay, so that being said, let's create a new stream because we're able to fetch data for the 2 DAGs, but now we want to fetch the data corresponding to the DAG runs and the task instances. Remember the dashboard. We want to see the DAG runs, DAG run success rate, average DAG run duration, but we also want to know the task instance success rate and the task retry count, as well as the number of successful task instances. So for that, we need to pull data from 2 more endpoints. And the endpoints are DAG run. So let's take a look at this one first, and we need to get a list of DAG runs. So this API endpoint, and we can see the response here. So let's go back to Airbyte, add a new stream, and here you see that the AI is suggesting some streams. So let's see if we have the DAG runs somewhere. All right, let's see DAG runs. Here we are. So click on DAG runs and then create. So again, we just need to wait a few seconds. And we got a new endpoint configured and ready to be tested. Actually, you can see that the URL is a little bit different than the previous one. It is /dags/config DAG/DAG runs. So that means we have to pass the DAG ID, the unique identifier of the DAG from which we want to pull the data. And actually, that corresponds exactly to what we have in the documentation /dags/DAG ID/DAG runs. So again, just by using the AI, we are able to configure this endpoint in Airbyte very quickly. Now, to test this endpoint, we need to make sure that we have some DAG runs. So if you don't, make sure that you have, regardless of the DAGs you are using, some DAG runs as shown right there. Otherwise, you won't get any data. Okay, in my case, the DAG ID I'm gonna use is my DAG. So let's go back to Airbyte, and you can see that we need to pass the DAG ID from config. So we have to create a new user input. So let's do that, which is DAG ID, and the field ID is the same, and then click create. And finally, in DAG runs, testing values, and here we pass my DAG. By the way, if you see something weird like that for your domain, make sure that it is not set like this. So let's copy and paste the link again, as we want to make sure we have the right domain. Click on save. And now let's verify the endpoint. And we got the 2 DAG runs as expected. Also, you can see this little warning here. Click on it and just import the schema. All right, now the last step is to add another stream, the last one corresponding to the task instances. Remember that we want to have some metrics about the task instances on our dashboard. That's what you can see here. So let's add a new stream. And again, we search for task instances right here. Click on create. We wait a little bit and we obtain the following endpoint. So as you can see here, we have to pass the DAG ID, but also the DAG run ID, exactly as defined in the Airflow documentation again. So if we take a look at task instance, to get the list of task instances, we have DAG ID and DAG run ID. So let's try this endpoint as well. So for that, we need to click on the DAG runs and pick a DAG run ID. So let's say this one. So let's copy the value. And back to Airbyte, we need to add a new config parameter, which is DAG run ID. So in the user inputs, add a new user input. And here it's DAG run ID. Then create. And for the task instances, click on testing values and add the following DAG run ID. Then click on save. And we can verify if it works by clicking on test. And we get one record corresponding to the only task instance that was executed during this DAG run ID. As we can verify from the Airflow UI, if you click on the DAG run, you can see that only one task was executed. So perfect. At this point, we have all the endpoints configured and ready to be used with Airbyte just by using the AI Builder. So this is wonderful because right now we are able to pull data using Airbyte from the Airflow REST API. Also, whenever you see something like that, it's because we changed something in the connector. So you need to verify that the connector still works. So click on test and let's see if we are still able to get 2 records. Perfect, it works. So now the connector is ready. Or is it? Because right now, if you have another DAG in your Airflow instance, like this one, with additional DAG runs and task instances, if you want to fetch the records, the data corresponding to those DAG runs and task instances, then you will need to specify the values as user inputs. So for example, if you want to fetch the DAG run corresponding to, let's say, this DAG, then you need to click on testing values, pass the DAG ID, then click on save, and then run the connector. And as you can see, here we get the DAG run. But the problem is, if you have many DAGs and DAG runs, you don't want to create one connector for every DAG run ID you have or every DAG you have. Obviously, it's impossible. You will end up with hundreds of connectors, so this is not what you want. Instead, you want those values, which are DAG ID and DAG run ID, to be automatically filled by Airbyte based on the values it fetches from the Airflow REST API. For example, the endpoint DAGs returns a list of DAGs with their DAG ID. So we want to use those DAG IDs to fill the value here. And for that, you just need to select DAG runs, then scroll down and enable parent stream. So here we are specifying the parent stream that we want to use, in this case DAGs. So the value DAG ID comes from the parent stream DAGs, and the parent key, so the value we want to use from DAGs, is called DAG ID. Okay, that's what we have right here in the record. And for the current parent key value identifier, it is DAG ID as well. Or actually, let's say parent DAG ID. Then hover this little icon and then copy this value and go back to the URL path, and you can use this value in place of the config DAG ID. Just make sure that you replace parent ID with parent DAG ID. And so now, as soon as you run this stream, Airbyte will automatically replace this value with every DAG ID that you got from the stream DAGs. So in fact, if we go to user inputs and remove the DAG ID, as we don't need it anymore, and then test this stream, so let's wait a little bit, you can see that now we got two partitions, partition 1 corresponding to the DAG ID example astronauts with one DAG run, and partition 2 corresponding to the DAG ID myDAG with two records corresponding to the two DAG runs that we have right here. The next step is to do the same thing for the task instances, as we want to fetch all task instances for all DAG runs. And for that, try, as an exercise, try to do it yourself, but otherwise you just need to go to task instances, and then again, you scroll down, you pick parent stream, then the parent stream is still DAGs. Okay, remember that you have to pass a DAG ID, so you need to create a parent stream DAGs. Then you fetch the DAG ID from the parent stream DAGs, and the current parent key value identifier will be parent DAG ID, like we did for DAG runs. But we need to add another one, so add a new parent stream, and this time it comes from DAG runs, and we want to fetch the DAG run ID. Okay, so that's what we have right here, DAG run ID. Okay. And the key value identifier will be parent DAG run ID. Then you copy this value and you paste it in place of the DAG ID. You replace parent ID by parent DAG ID. And you do the same for the DAG run ID. And you replace parent ID by parent DAG run ID. And now, if we test this endpoint, we should be able to fetch all the task instances. And that's what we got. So you can see that we have partition 1 corresponding to this DAG run ID from this DAG. And then we have partition 2 corresponding to this DAG run ID from this DAG. And same thing for partition 3, partition 4, and so on. But the thing is, we reached the limit here, so that's why we are not able to see any additional records. That's why you have this message here. But at this point, you are able to fetch all the task instances for all DAG runs, for all DAGs that you have in your Airflow instance, which is pretty amazing. But as you can see, we still have some warnings. In fact, we have primary key is not unique. Each record must have a unique primary key value. So that means for every record that we have here, we are not able to identify them uniquely. So let's add an additional value for the primary key here. So let's say PID, like that. And let's try again. Okay, now it looks like it is unique. We still have something for the schema. Okay, and I think everything is good. Let's try again. And boom, we are done. Or almost done, because there is still one issue here. Indeed, each time we run this connector, it will fetch all the data of the Airflow instance. But the thing is, we want the data only for the day at which the connector runs. So for example, if it runs on January 1st, we want the data for January 1st only. And if it runs on January 2nd, then we want the data for January 2nd only. But right now, we always fetch all the data. So for that, we need to add a filter. In fact, if you take a look at the Airflow API, for the list task instances endpoint, we have two query parameters that we can use, which are execution date GTE and execution date LTE. So let's do that. You can copy execution date GTE. And then for the endpoint task instances, you have query parameters, add a new one, add the key, and then add a second one, which is execution date LTE. And for the execution date GTE, you want to use the date at which Airbyte runs the connector. And for that, you can use this value. So stream interval dot start time. And then for the execution date LTE, it is the same, but end time. Okay, so that gives you the interval for which this connector will be scheduled. You will see that in a few seconds. So now we have that. We can do the same for the DAG runs. So let's add two query parameters, GTE and LTE, and we will use the same values. So start time for GTE and end time for LTE, like that. So let's see if it works. We need to run test. Okay, looks like we don't have any issues. Let's try with DAG runs as well. And it works. So last but not least, we can go to user inputs and remove the DAG run ID as we don't need that anymore. And congratulations, because at this point you have successfully created the Airbyte connector from scratch to pull the data from the Airflow REST API. The last step is to publish your connector. So you click on publish, and you can publish this connector to the workspace, or you can even contribute to Airbyte by submitting this connector to the community. But for now, let's stay simple, and we want to publish this connector in our workspace. So the connector name is Airflow REST API, click publish. And now if you exit the builder and take a look at the sources and add a new source, then custom, you have your new custom source, Airflow REST API. All right, now it is time to create the connection to load the data from the Airflow REST API into Snowflake. So let's create that connection. You go to connections, and then create your first connection. You need to select a source, so set up a new source, and then you look for Airflow under custom, and you pick Airflow REST API, so the connector that you've just created. Then you need to pass a domain and the API key. Again, for you, it might be username and password, but still you have to pass the domain, which is the URL to your Airflow instance, and click Setup Source. Then as you can see, Airbyte is testing the source. Perfect. Now we need to pick a destination. So set up a new destination and look for Snowflake. then pick Snowflake. And here you have a couple of things to do. The good thing with Airbyte is that on the left, you can configure the destination, and on the right, you have the setup guide. So you just need to follow it in order to configure that destination. Obviously, in order to do that, you need a Snowflake account. Keep in mind that you can create a Snowflake account for free. I already have mine, but you can click on this link and then you will access to Snowflake and create your Snowflake account for free. The next step is to run this query in order to configure Airbyte with Snowflake. We are not going to change anything here. We are not going to change the Airbyte role, the Airbyte user, and so on. But if you want to do that for real, if you want to use that project for real, then you need to change, the password, the schema, and so on. So make sure that you use the correct values in that case. But for simplicity here, we're going to stick to that query. So we just need to copy this big query and then access to your Snowflake account and create a new SQL worksheet. And then you just paste the query here and you run it. So let's wait a little bit. As you can see, there are a couple of queries to execute. And now the statement has been executed successfully. If we refresh the databases, we have a new database, Airbyte database. If you expand that, you have Airbyte schema and so on. All right, so everything is configured on Snowflake. We can go back to Airbyte. And here we need to specify the host. To find the host, you just need to go back to Snowflake, and at the bottom left corner, you click on your profile, then account, and then you choose your current account and you click on this link, copy account URL. So you copy that, then you go back to Airbyte and you just paste your account. So you can see that little check mark here. Then the Airbyte role, pretty easy. We just need to put Airbyte role here. Then for the warehouse, same thing, Airbyte warehouse. The database, Airbyte database, the default schema, Airbyte schema, and then the username is Airbyte user, and we can choose the authorization method, username and password, and the password is password. So again, just for the example, but in the real world, don't do that. Use real values. Okay, so let's set up the destination to see if it works. So again, Airbyte is testing the destination. Perfect. Let's move on to the next step, which is to select the streams. Okay, so remember that a stream is like a table or an entity that you want to extract from a source and load into a destination. And we have a couple of streams. As you know, we have DAG runs, DAGs, and task instances. So in that case, we are going to select all of them because we want to load all of them from the API into Snowflake. And you have different synchronizations modes. But if you are interested to know more about Airbyte, I did a course on Udemy, so feel free to check it out. Okay, so let's select all the streams and then we can click on next. And then we need to configure the connection. So in that case, we don't have to change anything here, but the important point is that this connection will run daily every 24 hours as specified right here. And that's why, if you remember, when we built the source for the Airflow REST API, we specified the execution date GTE and execution date LTE with an interval of time, and that interval comes from here, okay? Comes from the scheduler of Airbyte. Okay, so again, nothing to change. We can just click on finish and sync the data. So as you can see, Airbyte is syncing the data, and hopefully at some point we should be able to see some records in Snowflake. All right, it looks like we have successfully synchronized the data between the Airflow REST API and Snowflake. As you can see here, we have loaded a couple of records. So let's verify that in Snowflake. If we refresh databases, we have a new database, Airbyte internal. But let's take a look at Airbyte schema. If we expand that, we have tables, and then we can see the 3 tables, DAG runs, DAGs, and task instances as expected. We can even verify if we do have some data here. So let's type select, then all from Airbyte database, and then Airbyte schema, and then let's say DAG runs. So let's see if we have some data. And we do. All right, perfect. So congratulations, because at this point, you are able to extract data from the Airflow REST API and load that data into Snowflake every 24 hours automatically. So this is pretty nice. Now let's move on to the last step of the project, which is to build the dashboard. To create this dashboard, we will use Apache Superset, which is an open source platform to explore and visualize your data. That being said, we don't want to set everything up ourselves, so instead we will use the managed version of Superset, which is Preset. Obviously, if you want to set up Superset yourself, please do it, but just for simplicity, we're gonna use Preset here. So you just have to click on try for free and then create an account. You will have a bunch of questions to answer, and then you will land on this page where you have to create a workspace. I think you will already have a workspace, but still, if you don't have one, you just need to create a new workspace. Here, I already got one, so I'm just gonna access it. And then you have a bunch of steps to follow. So basically, you've already got your workspace. The next step is to connect to your data. So click here. And then you have to connect to a database. In that case, it is Snowflake. And you have a bunch of things to enter here. The database name, the username, password. You have all of that if you go back to Airbyte. And then take a look at the source, or actually the destination, and Snowflake. Right here, you have everything you need. So let's copy that, the Airbyte database for the database name. Okay, right here. Then the username is Airbyte user. Then the password is password. The display name, you can call it Snowflake, it doesn't matter. And now the account is the following one, in my case. Like that, so make sure that you respect what you can see here for the placeholder. So you need to remove this part. And then you have to enter the warehouse and the role. So let's do that. Airbyte warehouse. And the role is Airbyte role. Like that. Okay, so now let's connect to Snowflake and see if it works. Okay, it looks like we are connected. We can move forward. And now we have access to Snowflake from Superset. We can go back to the home. And the next step is to create a chart. So actually what you want to do here is to request the data to monitor whatever you want on your Airflow instance. So let's do that. You go to SQL and then SQL Lab. And we're gonna run a bunch of SQL queries. All the SQL queries that I'm gonna use, you don't have to write all of them manually. Instead, go to the Notion page under the description of this video. You will have all the SQL requests, so you just need to copy and paste them. Okay, the first step is to go on the left and then select your database, which is Snowflake. And then you can see the different schemas that you have. So let's select Airbyte schema. And now you can see the different tables that you have access to from this schema. In this case, DAG runs, DAGs, and task instances. The first SQL request we want to run is this one in order to know the success rate of the DAG runs. So if you run that SQL request, you can see here that for the two DAGs, my DAG and example astronauts, I have a 100% success rate, which is great. So now you have that, you can save this SQL query right here. So save the SQL query and let's call it DAG runs success rate. And then based on this SQL request, you can create a chart just to visualize the data later on the dashboard. So here the chart is pretty simple. We're just gonna keep it as it is right now. Just we want to add one thing, which is to add some color. And you can do that by going to customize and then add colors. And here you want to add a color to the column success rate. So whenever it is above, let's say 90, then you want to show this column in green. And whenever it is, let's say between 90 to 50, we want to use the color warning. And then below 50, we want to use the red color, like that. Okay? And now you can just save this chart and let's call it DAG run success rate. Click on save. So now, once you have that, you can create a new dashboard. So you go to dashboards and then add a new dashboard. let's call it Airflow Monitoring. And then you can add a new chart. So here you have the chart that you've just created, DAG run success rate. So you put it into your dashboard like that. And just like that, you are able to monitor the success rate of your DAG runs. So this is just the first metric that we want to monitor. Let's see the others. Go back to the SQL lab and then create a new tab. And now we want to run the following SQL request. So this SQL request is used to know the success rate of every task instance in every DAG you have on your Airflow instance. So if you run that SQL request, you can see that the task get astronauts in the DAG example astronauts has 2 runs. So this task has been executed twice and the 2 runs have been successful. And so the success rate for this task is 100%. And same thing for the other tasks that you have in your different DAGs. So this is pretty useful, but again, we can just save this query like we did before. So let's say task instance success rate, then click on save. And we can create a chart. We're gonna keep it as a table. We're gonna customize the color again. And here on the success rate, exactly like we did before, we want to say if it is above 90, then, or actually if it is, let's say if it is equal to 100, then we want to show the green color. And if it is below 100, then we want to show a warning message. Okay, and now you can save this chart and let's call it task instance success rate. Then click on save. Go back to the dashboard, Airflow monitoring, and again we can put it the new chart here, something like that. And now you are able to monitor your task instances in your Airflow instance. So I'm not going to show you all the SQL requests that you can run and all the metrics we can monitor here. Actually, if you want to take a look at that, here is the dashboard that you should be able to build at the end if you run all the SQL queries that you can find in the Notion page. But just to show you that this actually works, let's run a DAG and make it fail. Right now, everything is in green, but if we go back to the Airflow UI, and let's say we want to run example astronauts. So let's do that. We trigger the DAG, and now we want to mark it as failed. So you can see that we have 1 DAG run in failure. And if we go back to the dashboard and then refresh it, we cannot see that DAG run in failure. Why? Because we need to sync the data using Airbyte first. So let's go back to Airbyte, and then in our connections, we can click on it and sync now. So don't forget that this will be automatically run every 24 hours, but just for the example, we want to sync the data now so we will be able to see the DAG run in failure on our dashboard. So let's wait a little bit. The synchronization has been successfully completed. If we go back to our dashboard and then click on the 3 dots and then refresh dashboard, now we can see that the success rate for the DAG run has decreased and the success rate for the task get astronauts from the DAG example astronauts has decreased as well. So congratulations, because at this point you have successfully built a fully functional project to monitor your Airflow instance using the Airflow REST API, Airbyte, and Superset. So I hope you enjoyed that project. If you did, please don't forget to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. That will help me a lot. And if you have created a dashboard, please share it with me on LinkedIn or under that video. I would love to see it. So have a wonderful day, take care, and I hope to see you for our next video.